We're halfway through the legislative session in Maryland. It's the first time these Democrats have had to deal with a Republican in office for quite some time. Also, of course, Barbara Mikulski has decided to step down. That sort of opens up a whole big raffle there for her seat. It seemed like a good time to check in with Blair Lee, Maryland political analyst and an all-around great guy. Hey, Blair, how are you?
Hey, guys, how are you?
Well, good. Tell us, who's winning the epic showdown there between Governor Larry Hogan and the Democrats in Annapolis?
Yeah, for most Americans, March Madness means basketball, but here in Maryland, March Madness means the last month of the General Assembly session. And you're right, it's Larry Hogan, a Republican governor, dealing with a more liberal Democratic assembly than even the one before, if that's possible. And if you use the traditional way of measuring how the governor is doing, which is like scoring a lacrosse game or a baseball game, how many of his bills are passing, how many are being defeated, then Hogan's doing very poorly because basically the Democratic Assembly has rearranged his entire budget. They've changed all of his budget cuts. They've killed his rain tax repeal. They've killed his gas tax repeal. They've killed his charter school bill, and they're refusing to pass any of his tax cuts. So short term, from that point of view, Hogan's doing poorly. But I think long term, looking down the road for re-election, he's actually coming out quite well. Number of reasons. First of all, Hogan's spending cuts were really quite mild to start with. It was not across-the-board austerity. And to some extent, the Democrats have saved Hogan from himself. They've restored all of his spending cuts except for a 2% across-the-board agency cut, which basically government can weather in this economy. And they've done that without raising any taxes. They've used accounting gimmicks. Now, they have gone in and raided the state pension fund, which is unconscionable. The Baltimore Sun and Washington Post have condemned them for doing that. But basically, Hogan comes out looking good. And when it comes to the Democrats refusing to go along with his tax cuts and refusing to repeal the rain tax, Hogan can run for re-election 3 years from now saying, I told you so, voters. I heard your mandate. I tried hard, but the Democrats wouldn't let me do it.
Well, let's talk about the tick-tock on the rain tax. Where is it right now?
Hogan's version of the rain tax was killed in both the Senate and the House, okay? Instead, Mike Miller, the Democratic president of the Senate, has put his bill in, which is basically the same repeal of the rain tax with a fig leaf over it. They may or may not, the Senate has passed that. The House may or may not pass that. But this goes back to Democratic arrogance. Look, if there was one thing that helped Hogan win last year, it was the silly rain tax, which has made Maryland a national laughingstock. Every voter gets it, and yet the Democrats and the liberal media have spent the last 2 or 3 years not repealing the rain tax, but waging a crusade trying to rename it and get rid of the term rain tax and call it something else.
So let me get this right. Hogan proposes a repeal of the rain tax, and it gets shot down. And then Mike Miller, the Senate president, comes up with his own version that would repeal the rain tax?
Right, and that may pass. I mean, that's
so it's just a fight over who gets credit?
You got it, exactly. Whose name is on the bill.
Isn't that petty?
And here's the funny thing. The whole thing is a symbolic gesture to start with because, look, it only applies to 10 of Maryland's 24 counties.
Right.
And basically the counties, if they wanted to, could go ahead and just get the money out of their general funds to do these rainwater runoff projects. They don't have to have a separate tax on your property tax to do it. So the whole thing was silly to start with. It's a dumb law. Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, made fun of it when he was here. He said, in Texas, we pray for rain. In Maryland, you tax it, which was a great laugh line. And the Democrats paid a high price in last year's election. If they're smart, they'll pass Miller's bill.
Well, and listen, let's face it. I don't care whose name is on a repeal of the rain tax. Every Marylander knows that it wouldn't have been repealed if Anthony Brown had been our governor. This is something that Hogan talked about. I mean, Hogan should just say, fine, you want your name on it, fine, but everyone's going to know that this happened because of me.
You're exactly right. I mean, Larry Hogan can declare victory. Even though they're killing his bills and they've rearranged his budget, he can say, look, I have made them balance the budget without raising taxes. Can you imagine a year of the Maryland General Assembly without raising taxes?
Yeah. Let's pivot back over to, speaking of raising taxes, Barbara Mikulski. Let's pivot to her. She, of course, announced that she's not going to run. When we had you on that afternoon, and you gave us a whole litany and sort of an analysis of where you think it was headed, and boy, you were right. It looks like the two big names there are the two congressmen, Van Hollen and, of course, Congresswoman Donna Edwards out of Baltimore. You said that the Maryland Democratic Party would be crazy if they nominated a white male like Chris Van Hollen. Do you think that that's where they're headed?
Well, don't forget, the shoes haven't all dropped yet. You've still got some other white males looking hard at this. Look, in last year's election for governor, Baltimore, the Baltimore area, failed to field a candidate on any ticket in any party, in either party, okay, even in the primaries. For the first time in 100 years, I can't believe that the Baltimore area, which has controlled both Maryland U.S. Senate seats for the last 30 years, is not going to field a candidate. I can't believe Baltimore is going to just relinquish control of that seat.
Right.
So I think either John Sarbanes or Dutch Ruppersberger, somebody from Baltimore, will get in. And then you've got John Delaney, a multimillionaire congressman in the 6th District, taking a hard look at as well. For poor Chris Van Hollen, look, if another white male gets in, he's wounded against Donna Edwards, an African-American female. And if two more white males get in, I think Van Hollen's dead.
All right, so let me ask you this question. We've seen a Republican governor. Can there be a Republican senator?
It's tough, and here's why, in terms of this year versus last year. Last year was a gubernatorial race, which has a whole different voter turnout than a presidential race. In a presidential year, you have young people, minorities, and with Hillary on the ticket, which is my presumption, you'll have a lot of women who vote more liberal than men do, all coming to the polls. So it's going to be a Democratic year this year because of turnout, because of presidential election year. However, there is a chance, and it goes like this. The Democrats have to screw up. Don't forget, we're in a 2-to-1 Democratic state. But if the Democrats for U.S. Senate don't nominate Donna Edwards, I think that this is the year, or next year is the year, that blacks will stay home out of protest. I mean, how many years in a row can African-American Democrats be told by the white Maryland Democratic establishment, it's not your turn yet, you have to wait a while? The Republicans, though, need to nominate probably a moderate female would be the way to go. Laura Newman, the former county executive, Anne Arundel County, Mary Kane, who's run for lieutenant governor on Bob Ehrlich's ticket. And then the other big factor, which we don't really appreciate, is that the fight for U.S. Senate in Maryland next year is going to nationalize the election. That'll be a national election. What I mean is there'll be big money coming out of super PACs and the Democratic National Committee, Republican National Committee, because the fight for the U.S. Senate will now take place in Maryland, and that's going to change everything.
All right, Blair Lee, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, guys.